It's such an interesting career path that you chose. I too went to Fort Union Military Academy, and then a lot of my classmates went to Service Academy like yourself. I chose Seton Hall University and went that path. But it's interesting how you were able to transition, but still get into sports eventually and do that at the same time. For me, it was one of the best decisions I ever made going to a military academy. And I think I probably should have kept going the other route that you went, but do you feel that that was a wise decision and still impacts all the things you do to this day?
Who, as far as wisdom at any age, I don't know. I hope I have more wisdom now than I had back then. Youthful hubris probably had a lot more to do with going that way. I wanted to be a fighter pilot. It's funny how things change. I eventually did get the opportunity to go to flight school, and it ended up not being a career path that I wanted to pursue because I had already found the love of filmmaking, and so I opted to go back into what I was doing with the visual communications. I'd love to say I had it all planned out, and this is exactly where I intended to land, to include being on the podcast here today. But boy, life seems to just sort of be a collection of, decisions and opportunities, some good, some bad. I don't know if there was a whole lot of wisdom to it. Certainly, the Air Force Academy was the right price, unless I got a scholarship somewhere, which I should have pursued. I didn't have any way to pay for college, so maybe it would have been loans. But I don't know. I was a bit myopic at that point. I thought that's what I want to do, so I'm going to do that. And young and not really thinking through a lot of other options, I just decided that's what I wanted. I was fortunate it worked out. It was a year later than originally planned. As I mentioned, I had that prep school year at a place called Wentworth Military Academy, by the way, AJ, which sounds maybe a lot like, did you say Fort or Fork Union? Fort Union?
Fork Union. It's similar, very similar. And I was a postgraduate as well. So similar okay. Story in that aspect.
Yeah, this Wentworth, which went under about 4 years ago in 2017, and had been open since 1880. This was at the time it was an all boys military school in Lexington, Missouri. But I'd gotten close to getting into the Air Force Academy as a senior coming out of high school, but I had tanked a couple grades and a couple classes because I was slacking, and I'd gotten a nomination from a congressman in my district, which is required in addition to your grades being up to snuff and getting accepted. But I was, I guess, very close. So I was offered this scholarship through a foundation to do a year at one of several private military colleges. The options were like Valley Forge, which you may have heard of as well, and this Wentworth was one, and it was the cheapest, so I went with the least expensive one. But that school was something straight out of that movie Taps. Boy, it was a real eye-opening experience. But it prepped me well to get through the next 4 years, which I considered not continuing as well. So we choose the paths, we go down the roads we go down. I knew filmmaking was going to be a thing for me by my junior year, or maybe even entering into it. And so I thought about maybe jumping to a film school at that point. But again, the stability of the paid for education and the job in the Air Force, and when I found out I could do the combat camera career field, I thought that sounds really cool. I'm going to give that a try. How I ended up in sports TV was just a function of, I was in New York City earlier on in my career. I worked primarily as an editor when I jumped out of Syracuse into the business, because back at Combat Camera, we had gotten these Avid systems when they were brand new. And I had at the Air Force Academy when they were brand new, I was at the Air Force Academy, and I had learned to edit on one of those Avid systems. So when I was in combat camera, we got them there as well. And even though I was an officer, I was able to teach some of the enlisted troops how to use them. And so I kept my hand in it. And when I then, at the 4-year mark, did grad school and then jumped into the business, I already knew how to edit on an Avid system. And so as opposed to becoming a PA or some other sort of assistant and working my way in there, I was actually able to jump right into editing. I became a freelance editor, all with the goal of eventually becoming a producer director, and taking the creative lead on projects. But for about 5 years, that was my primary job, was as a freelance editor in New York. And in that role, I got on with a production company on a freelance gig that was doing some great work for ESPN. And the company was called Redline Films, and worked on a high profile show early in the HD days. There was an HD documentary show called Timeless that was kind of one of their marquee shows, and it got some awards as well, and kind of launched me into sports TV. And I hadn't intended to be a sports television person. I thought of myself, but found out, hey, you can make a living in sports television. There are a lot of good outlets here between the multiple sports channels, ESPN, NFL Network, HBO, and others now, Golf Channel. There's just so many outlets, and sports television as an entity really champions storytelling. It still does to this day. We see so much great documentary work within the sports film and television world, that just naturally lent itself toward, okay, if I can tell good stories here, I'm gonna stay here. And when I made the jump from New York out to, I live in Santa Barbara, so LA being the closest industry city, that's where I ended up connecting with NFL Network probably about 13, 14 years ago, and how Seth and I met.